Hello, welcome back to the live coverage of the UN Climate Talks here in Cancun in Mexico. I'm delighted to say that I've got Phil Ireland with me from Adopt a Negotiator, and he's going to give us the lowdown on what's been going on over the last couple of days. I'll just forewarn you that Fossil of the Day, an award here that's given to a country or a group of countries who are obstructing the talks, is going to kick off behind us, so you might hear the Jurassic Park theme music launch in halfway through. We've actually got yesterday's Fossil of the Day recorded, so we'll bring you that after this interview, and don't worry, we've got somebody over there getting today's as well, so that'll be up on oneclimate.net/Cancun this evening, and we'll bring it to you on the live show tomorrow. But Phil, let's get down to some policy discussions. Where are we at? We spoke to you a few days ago, and you said that some things are moving forward, some things are moving backwards, and I'm sure it's the same story in terms of the broad scheme of things. But you know, what's happening now with a couple of days to go?
That's true. It's the same kind of atmosphere. Some things moving forwards, others not. Just a few little things maybe regressing. But now we're getting into the real nuts and bolts of the high-level segment. So that's the part of the negotiations where heads of states, but also ministers and very senior politicians come and negotiate on behalf of their countries. So there are pluses and minuses to this section. The plus is that ministers and heads of state actually have more negotiating power, so they've got more political play and they can make decisions that perhaps the negotiators can't. They can give ground where negotiators can't. The downside is that some of the texts, the documents that will make up the rules of whatever treaty is made, probably aren't as far progressed as they needed to be to go into the ministers' hands, because ministers aren't specialists on this. They don't negotiate this all year. So there's a little bit of a concern there that some of the texts aren't ready to go to ministers, which is, we actually saw a similar thing at Copenhagen. And
well, it's a bit worrying if we're seeing parallels with Copenhagen, I guess, because many of our viewers will know that the outcome there was very disappointing. But the sense I've had so far is that people are more optimistic here, and perhaps that's partly because the expectations are lower, but they do believe that there might be achievements made when it comes to adaptation, possibly when it comes to a climate fund. They're expecting that to be the big headline coming out of these talks, and also on technology transfer and other such issues. So where do we see movement when we get down to the detail?
There certainly is some movement, and you're right, we have set a lower expectation, but like I said the other day, those building blocks and the foundations of an agreement are very important. We do expect to see movement on a global climate fund, and those negotiations are at a political level now, so they're ongoing. I've talked to a lot of different negotiators about it in the last couple of days, and there are a few political issues around the governance of the fund. So is it within the UN, is it outside the UN? Those kind of questions are coming up, and I'm confident they can be resolved, and that can lead to a decision via the whole meeting, but yet to see the outcome on that. I would note, beyond the specific decisions, there's also there's a bit of a lighter vibe between the USA and China, and it's possible we might see them moving through some of the kind of hardline positions they've held in the past, which is good for everyone. So there are other things going on which won't be quantified by specific decisions.
And so you mentioned there's maybe not quite the same kind of tensions that we've seen between the US and China in the past. What is the tone of these talks like, more generally? Because by the time we were at this stage in Copenhagen last year, at the last big major climate conference, the tone was pretty frantic, and people were already starting to see things fall apart, I think. So what's the atmosphere like in the Moon Palace where the negotiators are based?
I certainly wouldn't say it's frantic and things are falling apart. We're definitely not at that point, unequivocally not at that point. That may be happening in informals with just ministers, but I've certainly received no indication of that. The tone is cautious and constructive. Ministers and heads of state are acutely aware of some of the differences that exist, some really key differences, for example, around the status of the Copenhagen Accord, which was decided last year, but not accepted by everyone as a formal agreement. So how that sits here and what components of that can and cannot move forward. So no one's expecting a full treaty here. but we are expecting progress on a couple of issues. And yeah, I'd say that the atmosphere is cautious, but no one's ready to call it yet. And it just depends how flexible and generous negotiators are in those final days and final hours. I would note that I have it on good authority that negotiations are pretty much going to be running around the clock for the next 48 to 36 hours.
I guess that's good to hear in a sense. There's a lot of commitment here to thrash out some kind of deal. And familiar to our viewers in Copenhagen, I think we saw Ed Miliband emerge at kind of the early hours of the morning, looking incredibly tired with huge bags under his eyes. And we'll do our best to keep up with it. People have been telling me I look exhausted as well, so I'm sure that we'll keep pace with the negotiators perhaps. You mentioned the Copenhagen Accord and the status of the Accord. And I noticed in the US press conference earlier today, Todd Stern coming out and saying that they thought it was absolutely key that they didn't lose the signature achievements of that accord, and that was kind of the bottom line for them. Is this going to be a deal breaker here? Is this going to be something that kind of leads some parties to walk out, or is it going to be the case that we might be able to extract some elements of the accord, say for example the pledges on finance, and integrate them into something that's acceptable to those states like Bolivia and Venezuela who were so vehemently against it in Copenhagen?
If we can't extract aspects of the Copenhagen Accord, we're not really going to get very good outcomes here. The Copenhagen Accord isn't an official document in the UN, but there are components which are important. And without putting my own perspective on that, a lot of countries here aren't really going to go forward without those. For example, the Kyoto Protocol only really captures 16% of global emissions, whereas the pledges under the Copenhagen Accord capture around 80%. So that's actually one of the challenges. They're calling anchoring. How do we anchor the pledges made in Copenhagen? Because they're good pledges. I mean, they're pledges from countries to reduce emissions. They may not have been made in the right way, but it's still good when you're seeing countries reduce emissions. How do we put them into the Copenhagen Accord and the other treaty which we're trying to negotiate, which involves the US? Because of course the US isn't in the Copenhagen Accord. There are legal questions and there are practical questions around how that happens, but that's something that everyone's looking to be achieved, to actually have them set in some kind of concrete so there's an extra level of accountability. And before South Africa even, we see countries starting to turn their emissions around. And in Australia, I know that's quite important. Now our domestic situation looks for signals from the international context, and good progress here at the UNFCCC will go a long ways in helping strong domestic action in Australia.
Okay, well let's hope we can take those pledges from the Copenhagen Accord and also ratchet them up so that they're scientifically
absolutely
sufficient and move forward from there. Rather than compete with today's Fossil of the Day award, which is going on behind us, we're going to bring you a recording of yesterday's. If you want the latest updates, don't worry, because we've got a camera team over there and we'll have that online later this evening. But here's the Fossil of the Day from yesterday.